At the wedding, Tom called me by his first love's name in front of everyone. His face turned all flustered, and his first love, sitting in the audience, got teary-eyed. Under the sympathetic stares of everyone, I changed out of my wedding dress and handed it to her. This wedding isn't mine anymore. Years later, I got remarried and saw Tom again. He was alone, still wearing our old wedding ring, and he asked me, "Can we give it another shot?" Tom called me Jenny right in front of me. While putting a ring on my finger, he blurted out, "Jenny, I love you." The audience went wild, like the place was on fire. Jenny looked at Tom, eyes welling up with tears. Tom suddenly realized his mistake and looked at Jenny with guilt, mouthing an apology. I stood there, looking down at the wedding dress I had chosen so carefully, and sighed. This must be what it feels like to make a wedding dress for someone else. I felt like such a fool, thinking Tom really got over his first love just because he said he did. When he proposed, he promised to love me forever and that I was the only one in his heart. But not even half a year passed before he broke that promise. I took my hand back from Tom's grip. He seemed to just realize I was the one most hurt by all of this, and he refused to let go. "Sally, it's not like you think." I took a deep breath, looked up at him with a burning throat, and asked, "Then what is it, Tom? Do you know you called your wife the wrong name?" Tom fell silent, words stuck. In the audience, Jenny was crying and quietly pleaded, "Sally, don't be harsh on him. He didn't mean it." I closed my eyes for a second, then smiled at Jenny, "Give me a few minutes." I turned and walked to the dressing room. It wasn't until I got there that my parents and best friend realized what was happening. My parents cursed at Tom, while my best friend cried, "Tom, are you even human? Who stood by you when you were like a drowning puppy?" Tom tried to stop me, but I told my friend, "Don't let him touch me." My friend and parents held on to Tom firmly, giving me time to get to the dressing room and change out of my wedding dress. When I came back out, Tom had taken a punch to the face from my dad and was now looking my way. I walked straight over to Jenny. Tom broke free from my parents and ran toward us, softly shouting, "Sally, don't make it hard for her, be mad at me." My friend was jumping with anger. I shook my head, "I'm not angry, Tom. Not at all." I looked at him, speaking clearly, "I'm ready to accept my loss." Tom froze. "Sally, what do you mean?" I didn't answer him. Instead, I handed the wedding dress to Jenny. "This wedding is for you now." Tom rushed up and grabbed my arm. "Sally, don't do this. It's my fault, but isn't this too much?" "It is," I interrupted him, "it really is." Tom's face darkened. "How can I apologize to you then?" I just shook my head and smiled. "Tom, I don't need an apology. Just close your eyes and figure out who's really the bride in your heart." Tom stood there, silent, longer than he should have. It got awkward for me. I pursed my lips, tasting the bitterness, then shook my head, said goodbye, and walked away. My friend and parents followed, ranting and complaining as we left. Amidst the noise, I heard a sigh behind me, as if someone felt relieved. Half an hour into marriage, half an hour out. My friend was in my room crying in anger, my parents were in the living room sighing. But I just stared blankly out the window, unable to shed a tear. I was willing to accept my loss. Falling for Tom was a big gamble. Tom was tall, handsome, smart, and from a good family, always the center of attention. My friend warned me not to go for the impossible, but I couldn't help it. When I was a kid, I was silly and fell into a lake. Tom, just out of school, jumped in and pulled me out. I saw his uniform, and I remember someone calling him Tom. He patted my head, told me not to worry, and carried me home. His eyes curved a little when he smiled, and I remembered that for a long time. We ended up at the same middle school, then the same high school, and finally the same university. Back then, I didn't understand love. I just knew I loved seeing him smile, especially at me. Tom remembered me because I was always around where he was. Once he gently said to me, "Sally, you should find a guy who likes you." He frowned a little as he smiled. I'm not right for you. I knew he loved Jenny, but Jenny kept him at arm's length. Everyone knew Jenny was more interested in Mark, a top-tier rich kid at school. I handed a cup of warm milk to Tom. I'm not trying to win your heart, I just want you to be happy. Tom took the milk, nodded and after a while, said thanks. That evening, Mark, who was never interested in Jenny, suddenly pulled up with flowers in a flashy sports car, asking her out to dinner. Jenny climbed into Mark's car under everyone's gaze, and news spread quickly through the school. That night, Tom got drunk, called me to join him on the grass outside the library, where we sat drinking beer, looking at the stars. You see, I'm just a failure, there's nothing to like about me, he muttered, drunkenly. I looked at his handsome profile under the streetlight, noticing an air of sadness. Drinking a huge gulp of beer, I patted his shoulder. Who says that? You're a hero to me. Raising my voice, I added, a hero who saved me from drowning. Tom turned towards me abruptly, disbelief in his eyes trying to find a trace of the past. Just then, Mark's sports car roared into the campus, joyfully carrying Jenny back. When it drove past, it slowed down and passed by us in silence. The headlights illuminated my face and Tom's eyes. He quietly asked, "Are you that chubby-cheeked girl?" Under the car's lights, I smiled with dimples and nodded. Tom glanced from Mark's car to me, then wrapped his arm around me. The car thundered away once more. When I was with Tom, Jenny came to see me. She looked me over and said, "You're not as pretty as I thought you'd be." I nodded. I'm aware of myself, standing next to a beauty like Jenny, not many would look attractive. Jenny seemed puzzled and said, "I thought Tom would always wait for me." I looked down and replied, "Maybe because since you're with Mark, you shouldn't be thinking about Tom anymore, right?" Jenny's expression shifted, but she didn't say anything. That evening, Mark called me. "Who says I'm with that girl? Just having a meal counts as being together?" At the time, I was making juice for Tom to sober him up. I had my phone wedged between my ear and shoulder, watching a tipsy Tom. I whispered, "Weren't you guys on a date?" Mark's voice dropped, sounding a bit sulky. "Yeah, and we did a little more than that." Mark and I were high school classmates. Sitting next to him for 2 years, I knew he had a quick temper but a soft heart. Not everyone was scared of him like they were of others. I took a deep breath. Don't ruin your reputation or hers. You're not that kind of guy. Mark paused, seemed like he wanted to say something, but eventually just sighed, sounding disheartened. You should worry about yourself, stop trying to warm someone else's cold shoulder. I looked down at the freshly squeezed orange juice but said nothing. I knew. But I couldn't let go. Few people have experienced being heavily pushed down to the lake's bottom. Completely out of control, fear maxed out, and nothing to do but await death. At the darkest moment, suddenly a beautiful hand wraps around your waist, bringing you back to the surface, and in that first second of seeing the sun again, gives you a reassuring smile. How could I forget him? It's impossible. I turned, carrying the orange juice over to a red-eyed, silent Tom and said, "Got it, thanks," then hung up the phone. After that day, Mark suddenly went abroad for studies. Jenny also went abroad as an exchange student. And Tom and I officially got together. When Jenny just left, Tom often spaced out. I never interrupted him, I just quietly handed him a glass of orange juice and sat next to him, spacing out together. Sometimes I'd scroll through Twitter and see that Mark had bought a new sports car or thrown a big party. Occasionally, Jenny would appear in the photos, smiling gently but looking somewhat tired. Once, Tom saw Jenny singing a birthday song for Mark in a fancy dress in a video on my phone. He stared at that short clip for quite a while, finished his juice, closed his eyes, and fell into a deep sleep all the way till morning. He held my hand tightly and wouldn't let go. That night, Mark called me several times, but I missed his calls. Once Tom was asleep, I called back. Mark was drunk. "Sally, why didn't you pick up?" I was confused and replied, "Lower your voice, it's late." "I didn't forget your birthday, I sent you a gift. Mark, like a deflated balloon, quieted down. After a while, amidst the noisy party sounds, he sounded dejected. Never mind, it's nothing. I sighed, couldn't help nagging, don't drink too much, stop racing cars, and if you really like Jenny, make it official. If not, don't lead her on. Since high school, knowing his stubborn but soft-hearted nature, I often nagged him, which helped pull Tom away from silly ideas about being a mob boss, and got him into college. This time, though, Mark was particularly impatient. All right. Got it. He hung up, seeming annoyed. You don't know anything. It was baffling. But from then on, Tom never spaced out or drank. He returned to being his bright, vibrant self and had me by his side. I was his girlfriend. Jenny seemed to have never existed. Turns out, Tom as a boyfriend is pretty great. He's gentle, attentive, gives emotional support, and cares about everything you say. Once when I had a nightmare, he stood outside looking up at my dorm window, calling me, "You're not drowning again. Sleep now, I'm downstairs." When I cut my hand during an experiment, he insisted on taking me for a tetanus shot even though iodine would have done it. "Don't worry, if it hurts, squeeze my hand." Knowing I love oranges, he drove to a nearby city and bought boxes of locally fresh ones. My roommates said Tom treated me very well, envying me. Only my bestie Monica raised an eyebrow, but he's always said he likes you, never that he loves you. I thought about it and realized it was true. He always looked at me deeply, touching my face, saying, "Sally, I really like you." Never mentioning love. I thought maybe it's still early, love grows with time, so I just smiled, feelings need time to build. Monica rolled her eyes and went back to browsing her phone. After a while, she called me over. "Look, Mark's become a race car driver." I rushed over, saw Mark in a racing suit, his long legs relaxed, holding a helmet, looking sharply into the camera. Jenny stood beside him. Behind them, cars branded with well-known team logos. I checked my Twitter, completely empty. Mark had blocked me. Suddenly, I realized Mark hadn't reached out since that late-night call, and I hadn't seen any new Twitter updates from him. I was taken aback. It felt strange to have such a distance grow between friends. But then again, perhaps Mark no longer needed someone to nag him like his old desk mate. I shut off my phone and got on with my life. Time flew, and I graduated from college. Mark, long out of touch, called me in a flat tone, "Congrats on graduating." I was both surprised and delighted. "How've you been these years?" Mark paused, said nothing for a moment, then added, "If a job's hard to find, call me." I laughed. I'd heard from Monica's Twitter how Mark had matured. He was now a rising star, transformed from a reckless youth into a family pride. I felt proud too. After all, I played a part in him ditching that gangster dream. After hanging up, Tom asked who it was. I said it was Mark. Tom stiffened but didn't say anything. Tom never liked Mark. He'd say sons of nouveau riche families are foolish and foolish. But he'd casually grab my phone and scroll through Mark's reopened Twitter, studying those photos like he's searching for something. One day, Mark won a rally race, and in a little video, Jenny jumped up and kissed him. Although Mark quickly pushed Jenny away, the red lipstick mark was still there on his face, bright and glaring. Tom stared at it for a long time. A few days later, he lowered his head while making me seafood noodles and asked, "Wanna get engaged?" I looked up in surprise, seeing the ring he seemed to pull out of nowhere and his warm smile. "Sally, let's get engaged." Tom gently held my hand and slipped the ring on my finger. It was a pretty big diamond, twinkling under the lights. I was blinded by the ring's brilliance and slowly realized the happiness I wanted might finally be here. I couldn't stop smiling, nodded firmly, and hugged Tom tight. He hugged me back gently, kissed my hair, his voice a bit choked. "Sally, I really like you. Really, really like you." My hand froze for a second, but soon after. He picked me up and carried me to the bedroom, making me forget where that weird feeling came from. When Tom and I got engaged, my parents were thrilled. But Monica was acting all odd. She tugged at my sleeve, like she was the reluctant father of the bride. "Can't you wait another couple of years?" I chuckled helplessly. "If you want to marry me, just say it." Monica rolled her eyes. "In your dreams." "I'm wondering if he's told you he loves you yet?" I paused, looking at Tom in the distance. Tall, handsome, and gentle, smiling at me across the guests. At that moment, it seemed like I was the only one in his eyes. Such a certain look. I calmed down, trying to reassure Monica. "Does it really matter if he says it? I mean, I'm marrying the man I love, and right now I'm all he sees. Isn't that enough? Why force him to say it?" Monica just picked up her phone to play a game, ignoring me completely. "That's only because you're standing in front of him. Open your eyes, dummy." She pouted. "When you regret it, remember to come cry at my door. I love a good show." I rubbed my forehead, spending ages trying to distract her from her game. But I couldn't shake the strange sadness that settled in. Tom noticed and asked, "What's wrong?" I shook my head. "Nothing." I reminded myself, eyes are the windows to the soul. If I'm in his eyes, surely I'm in his heart too. After the engagement party, I posted a photo of the ring on Twitter. There were tons of congratulatory messages. Only Mark messaged me, and it just took a second. 2 words, "Idiot." His tone was unclear, as if he'd been drinking. I stared at my phone for ages, unsure what he was going through. I felt certain there was love between Tom and me. If he felt my hands were cold at night, even half asleep, he'd pull me close to keep me warm. When I was exhausted from work and lost my appetite, he'd practice cooking repeatedly from videos, becoming quite the chef. At some point, I'd stopped making him orange juice, and he started making me seafood noodles instead. He even went to a temple to get a marriage charm, seriously putting it on both of us, with wishes for eternal happiness written on it. How could he not love me? Maybe some people just aren't good with words. But Monica argued that true love is never at a loss for words. If they can't say it, it's just not love. She sighed, patting my head. "Tom's in the debate team, you know. If he's not good with words, who is?" Faced with Monica's rant, I kept quiet, feeling a bit stuck. Isn't liking and loving someone about wanting to be with them and treating them well? What's the fundamental difference? Love is different for everyone. Who's to say they have the right answer? But after that, I started dreaming. I kept dreaming of Tom holding my face, trying to tell me something. But for some reason, whenever he'd open his mouth, the words would vanish. Tom said I was having pre-wedding jitters. Leaning on him, I suddenly blurted out, "Do you think there's a difference between love and like?" Tom's hand paused while patting my back, seeming deep in thought. After a moment, he cleared his throat and laughed. "They both involve feelings, so how different can they be?" I nodded. "I think so too." Tom didn't add anything more, just silently soothing me to sleep. I drifted off, feeling that he wasn't tired at all. Tom and I set a wedding date. We bought a house, decorated completely to my taste. We agreed to get a little white dog and a little yellow dog someday. My driving skills aren't great, so Tom drove me to and from work, cooking dinner every night. His smile was warm and bright, easily drowning me in happiness. I thought life would always be like this. But who would have thought Jenny would suddenly return? And alone, no Mark in sight. She abruptly added me on social media. "Heard you and Tom got engaged, congrats." She said, "Looks like I'm probably staying for good. We'll have plenty of chances to catch up." My first thought was of my former seatmate, so I replied, "How's Mark? Why didn't you two come back together?" Mark wasn't posting on Instagram or replying to messages, so who knows how he was doing. Jenny didn't reply for a long time, and I got so busy that I forgot about it. Days later, work got even busier, leaving me exhausted and dizzy. I forgot Jenny was even back. I was so swamped that Tom hardly crossed my mind. So when Tom came home late one night, I didn't even think to ask why. It was only the next morning when I casually mentioned, "Were you working late last night?" Tom paused. "Yeah. Won't happen again." I said, "At your career stage, it's fine to work late. I'm not clingy." Tom just kept his head down, silent. A few days later, Jenny posted on Instagram about how she loved nighttime beers by the river with old friends, reminiscing over good and bad. I saw it and gave it a quick like. Tom, who was scrolling his phone at the time, suddenly started coughing violently. He gulped down his iced water, trying to suppress his cough, and asked me, "Why did you add Jenny? And you even liked her post?" A bit puzzled, I replied, "Aren't you supposed to be watching stocks? Yet you were scrolling through Instagram, huh?" Tom's lips drooped a little, and he said nothing. After a while, he mentioned there was something at work, and he had to work late. While I was on the balcony hanging clothes, I glanced down and saw him on the phone for a long time downstairs. Afterwards, he hurriedly drove away. That night, he came back late, bringing in the crisp cold night air, and hugged me through the blanket. His voice was tired, as if speaking to me, or maybe to himself. "In 3 months, we'll be married." Like he was trying to prove something. "I love you, Sally." Half asleep, I mumbled and patted his hand, "I love you." Tom froze. The next morning, he had red eyes and made me breakfast. When I asked about his eyes, he handed me a cup of coffee. "Just had some things on my mind, slept late." He stroked my hair and asked, "I don't think I've ever confessed to you." I pursed my lips. "Say you don't mind, but honestly, who doesn't care?" Whenever I watch romantic dramas and come across confession scenes, I skip them because they make me feel empty. Now, as I look at Tom, I start getting nervous. Is he finally going to say those 3 words? Tom's body tensed and his Adam's apple bobbed. "Sally, actually, I..." He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "I'm telling you, I..." he repeated. I quietly waited for him to finish. To hear those long-awaited 3 words. But I never got the chance because Tom's phone rang, cutting us off. He glanced at the screen and subtly exhaled, apologizing, "Sorry, there's an emergency at work." Then he rushed out the door. His speed was like he was fleeing the scene. I stared at the door he slammed shut for a long time. Suddenly, I felt maybe Monica was right. Some things you can't just let slide. I bit my lip and texted Tom, "How about finishing what you wanted to say when you get back tonight?" After a while, Tom replied with an okay. But he didn't come home that night. It wasn't until the early hours when I heard the door and smelled the alcohol on him. He crashed into bed, sleeping until late morning, while I had a meeting and couldn't wait for him. When I got home, I was exhausted, having forgotten about the words I was waiting for. But the next day, I saw Jenny's tweet, "What others long for, I once tossed aside without knowing its value." I set some time to talk to Tom. In a cafe, locking eyes, I cut straight to the point. "Tom, I want to hear those 3 words." Tom paused and then smiled. "Which 3 words?" I sighed. "Some things need to be taken seriously, Tom." I added, "If you can't say it today, maybe we should reconsider our wedding. A marriage without love doesn't go far." Tom hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my hand. He took a deep breath, steadying his voice, closing his eyes. "Sally, I do love you." I watched him quietly as he looked back at me. In that moment, he didn't avoid my gaze. I closed my eyes, sighing in relief. Maybe I was just overthinking this. So I forced a smile. "How about we go look at furniture?" Tom nodded in agreement, also sighing in relief. He thought I didn't notice, but I did. That feeling of relief, like a burden lifted, that subtle but noticeable distance. It was the same feeling Tom gave me years ago before Jenny went abroad. And now, it's back. I stopped in my tracks, seriously asking Tom once more, "Do you really love me?" I stared into his eyes, are you really willing to marry me? Tom also stopped. This time, he didn't hesitate, looking firmly into my eyes. I want to marry you, Sally, dream or no dream. I exhaled. Maybe I was honestly just anxious about the wedding. He said willing so seriously before. But he said it so seriously that I missed that he dodged my other question. Just before the wedding, Jenny asked to meet again. She smiled and said she broke up with Mark. Then she looked me over. Who would have thought Tom, such a catch, is now with you? I wasn't fond of that remark. I love him, not his prospects. Jenny laughed, sipping her coffee. Tom has a promising future ahead. She flashed her wristwatch, diamonds shining brightly. I was stunned, recalling seeing Tom staring late at night at a watch I didn't recognize. Also encrusted with diamonds, twinkling coldly under the dim bedside lamp. Just like the one on Jenny's wrist. And it never even crossed my mind to ask him. But I didn't want to lose my cool in front of Jenny, nor unjustly accuse Tom. So I stood up and politely said goodbye. Whether or not the future is promising is something for us to decide, not an outsider, but thanks for your concern. I walked out of the cafe, past Jenny's stiff smile and the sparkling watch, and took out my phone to call Tom. Tom, after hearing me, was silent for a moment before asking, why meet with Jenny? It wasn't necessary. What about the watch? I insisted, struggling to keep my hands steady. At that moment, it seemed like a thin line was slowly connecting dots together. Those late nights and sleepless evenings, those moments of panic at the mention of love, and Jenny's cryptic tweet. Tom, I took a deep breath. I can cancel the wedding if you say you don't love me, that you have someone else. Breathing heavily on the other end. After a few seconds, he spoke soothingly. The watch was brought from Germany by a colleague. I can show you the chat history and the receipt. He hung up and sent screenshots. It was his conversation with a colleague. He asked the colleague to bring a watch for the wedding. The same one on his wrist. I stared at the screenshots, exhaling deeply. Maybe, everything was just my imagination. Since that day, Tom came home much earlier, also handling the wedding preparations. Soon, our wedding day arrived. There's no way I'm not excited. This is a first for me. I look in the mirror at myself, wearing a pristine white wedding dress, smiling. It's a stark contrast to Monica next to me, whose face looks upset. I pat her and say, don't worry. You have a room in the new place. I'm not ditching my friends for love. Monica sighs. Mark didn't come, huh? I bite my lip, feeling a bit down. No matter what I said, Mark wouldn't come. He asked Monica to give a gift for him instead. I change the subject and go to greet guests with Tom. While meeting one of Tom's coworkers, he jokes with me, how's the watch? I blink, completely confused. Tom quickly steps in, pulls his coworker along, and heads inside. Watching Tom's back, I suddenly feel uneasy. That discomfort lingers, even as the wedding begins. It only clicks when Jenny arrives late, sitting in the audience. Her sleeveless top reveals a sparkling watch on her wrist, matching one on stage. I recall the screenshots Tom once showed me. Something felt strangely missing between them. Looking at the audience, I see Tom's coworker staring at Jenny's watch, his expression puzzled and troubled, like he's made a mistake. He quickly glances up at Tom, then at me, and swiftly lowers his gaze, avoiding eye contact. His discomfort is almost audible in my mind. Those irregular, almost insignificant details Tom dismissed flow back, clicking into place, forming an unbreakable chain. I open my mouth, looking at the man before me. He's carefully putting a ring on my finger, sincere and devoted. But then blurts, Jenny, I love you. I close my eyes. So, it's true. How did this happen? The room erupts into chaos. There I am, on stage, the watch gleaming painfully, and tears sting my eyes. I take a deep breath. Monica was right all along. I've been a fool. There's a big difference between liking and loving. All those moments I felt cherished, I was simply the only one in his presence. A sad truth. Lowering my head, I quickly say, "Give me a few minutes." I rush off the stage, change out of my gown, and head back out. Tom gets punched by my dad and kicked by Monica. Not a dignified moment for him. But he doesn't fight back. He just looks toward me, his gaze falls on the dress in my hand, showing a hint of shock. I ignore him and walk straight to Jenny, handing her the wedding dress. "Switch it up, this is your wedding." Tom, worried I'd make things hard for Jenny, breaks free and follows me. After I speak, he stands there, stunned. I see fear and helplessness flash in his eyes. He grabs me. "Sally, it's not like that. I just misspoke." Looking at his handsome face, I smile. "Tom, then say it. Just once. Say you love me, Sally, not Jenny. Say I am the bride in your heart." Tom opens his mouth, yet no words come out. I stand silently, waiting. Waiting for him to deal the final blow to this facade. Time ticks by. Jenny stands behind Tom, pleading tearfully for me not to pressure him. I ignore her, fixated on Tom as his face pales, and finally, he releases my hand. "Sally, I'm sorry." My eyes well up, but I hold back tears. I just sigh and walk away amidst the chaos. "I wish you both a long life of unhappiness." So, I was dumped on my wedding day. Monica cries like she's the one who got jilted. Liking someone is just being fond of them, intrigued, but love demands more depth. Tom just had a fleeting interest in me, nothing deeper. That night, I had a dream. A little girl falls into a lake, grabbing the boy saving her, asking, "Do you love me?" The boy smiles and lets go, ignoring her cries as she slowly sinks into the cold water. The sensation of drowning was palpable, as if the lake water presses on my dream heart, refusing to let me wake. I try to move, to yell, but I'm too weak. The water and that boy's smile press down, leaving me powerless. But just as I'm about to sink, a call jolts me awake. It's Mark. As soon as I answer, he sighs exasperatedly. "Told you not to chase cold shoulders with warm faces. You deserved it, right?" I haven't heard Mark's annoying yet comforting tone in a while. Back when I'd bomb exams and cry on my desk, Mark would always lighten the mood like this. Through the breakup and all, I hadn't shed a tear. But hearing his taunting voice, I suddenly feel really hurt. Sniffling, the tears finally flow, unstoppable. In between sobs, I chide, "Did I mock you for wanting to be a gangster boss? Who was it dragging you to college, huh?" More sniffles. "Now you call from abroad to make fun of me for getting dumped? You got dumped by Jenny too, we're equally pathetic." Mark laughs. "Grab a tissue before your snot dribbles into your mouth." As I blow my nose, he casually adds, "Last time, I'm telling you, I was never with Jenny, she's always been chasing me. Never even touched her." I pause, surprised. "Weren't you two together for years?" "She chased me for years. Realized recently it wasn't happening and backed off." He continues with a joking scold, "You moron, can't even hold your own. She just got back and swiped your fiancé." I blow my nose again, wipe my tears, staying silent. Mark just listens quietly on the other end as I cry. After a bit, sensing I've calmed down, he half jokes, "Wanna come abroad? Or just visit me for a break?" I sniffle, saying, "No, my parents wouldn't let me go." That's when I hear the flick of his lighter. After a while, with a cigarette in his mouth, he mumbled, "All right, I'm heading back." I was a bit surprised. "Why are you coming back? Aren't you into racing anymore?" "Going back to start a club, and check on a fool, of course," Mark laughed happily. I looked at him gloating and blurted, "Smoking makes your breath stink." Mark laughed, "I'll quit now." Mark came back. His first stop was to pick me up for dinner. Monica was there too. At the table, they joked around, sometimes making fun of each other and occasionally teaming up to tease me. The private room was bustling with energy, almost making me feel like I was back in high school. Like that wedding was just a dream. Like Tom was just a dream. I knew Mark and Monica were doing their best to cheer me up. So I smiled. I joined their banter, just like in high school, teasing one another and laughing. We kept it going until the dinner ended, and Mark drove me home. As I was about to get out of the car, Mark suddenly reached out from the driver's seat and grabbed my hand. Have you been holding back tears all day? I paused and stayed silent. Mark dragged me back into the passenger seat. Let me take you somewhere. Where? A place where you can cry your heart out. On the way, my phone rang. I looked at it and hung up. It rang again, and I hung up again. The third time, Mark grabbed it and answered, Tom, huh? What's up? Looking for Sally? Sally's tired, almost asleep. Why is she sleeping next to me? Is that really your business? What are you to her? There was silence on the other end. Mark sneered, ended the call, and tossed the phone back to me. Give him my number. Tell him to look for me if there's anything. I didn't say anything, just looked at my phone. Less than 2 minutes after Mark ended the call, Jenny texted me, Mark's back? Are you with him? I let out a long sigh and turned off my phone. So, Tom and Jenny are together. That's how Jenny knew Mark was with me so quickly. I looked out the window as the cool mountain breeze rustled the shadows of the trees. Before I knew it, Mark had brought me to the suburbs. Surprised, I asked, why'd you bring me here at night? Mark chuckled, relax, I'm not selling you. Who'd pay for a fool? Saying that, he turned the car, drove up a winding road, and reached the top of a hill. The night wind was cool, the stars sparse, and from the hilltop, you could overlook the city lights. It was quite a scene. But why bring me here? Are you suggesting I shout at the city below? Is that it? I asked, isn't that an old TV show cliché? Mark's face shifted, and he pulled out his phone, looking something up. I was puzzled until I saw he had searched on Google, how to cheer up a sad girlfriend. And under one answer, he harshly commented, terrible answer. So outdated and useless. I couldn't help but laugh, dragging Mark to sit down. Viewing the scenery was nice, no need to shout at the city below. The stars dotted the sky, the city lights sparkled, and the cool wind blew against the inky blue sky. It did help untangle some knots in my heart. Thanks, Mark, I said softly, looking at his defined jawline. Mark took off his jacket and draped it over me, no need to thank me. He paused and added, if you really want to, just spend more time with me. I've just returned, and everything feels unfamiliar. I was about to say this was his hometown, but seeing his puppy-like eyes, I nodded instead. That night, Mark and I stayed on the hilltop until dawn. When the sun slowly rose, I let out a gentle breath. Nature was so majestic, making human greed and dissatisfaction seem as insignificant as ants. I patted a sleeping Mark, okay, let's go, I'm feeling better. Mark blinked awake, saw me smiling at him, and instinctively showed a puppy-like grin, let's go get breakfast. After that day, I kept my promise and hung out with Mark after work every day. Tom called me once, seemed a bit drunk, asking, Sally, could you come back and squeeze me some orange juice? It never tastes the same when I do it. I replied indifferently, let Jenny make it for you. Then I blocked him. A few days later, Tom started showing up at my office, greeting my coworkers with a smile like nothing happened. He looked thinner, his face haggard. Sally, I've made porridge. Will you come back and have some? I closed my eyes. What was this about? Let Jenny have it, don't bother me. I walked around him. Tom called out behind me, his voice filled with hesitation and doubt, but you're the one who's different. He seemed lost, I don't know what's different, but this isn't what I want. I kept walking, not wanting to think about what he meant. Who knew what he was saying? After hearing about all this, Mark started picking me up after work. Later, he got worried and began dropping me off in the mornings too. We once saw Tom from afar, and Mark immediately wrapped his arm around me, escorting me into the office building like some cocky rooster. Tom stood frozen, watching us silently, his mouth opening to say something, but Mark moved too fast, whisking me away. "I'm not giving you a chance to regret anything," Mark said, making me laugh. From the corner of my eye, I saw Tom stagger slightly. He didn't appear again. But Mark still picked me up and dropped me off. One day on the way home from work, he casually asked, "You've liked that jerk since high school. Do you still like him now?" I was looking at pictures from mutual friends on Twitter of Tom and Jenny's wedding prep. It was perfectly romantic, way better than mine. I put down my phone, glanced at Mark, watched him nervously biting his lips, creating a single dimple. It seemed I'd been so focused on Tom that I hadn't noticed how good-looking Mark was. I shook my head solemnly. I don't like him anymore. Every day, outside of work, all my time was taken up by Mark. I realized it had been a long time since I thought of Tom. Mark's eyes lit up, and he started whistling. So, I ended up with Mark. The whole thing was smooth and natural. Being with him was easy and comfortable. I started loving to joke around with him, as if I'd gone back to high school. Monica was always glued to me, and she would chuckle sneakily on the side when she saw us bickering. She said, "Sally, haven't you noticed Mark loves confessing to you?" I blushed. Mark's confessions were always at the most random spots and were super dramatic. "I'm crazy about you." Could be in a restaurant, could be on the street. Whenever the mood struck, he'd shout it out. Monica, all giddy, said, "Back in school, I thought he was perfect for you. If it weren't for Tom and Jenny stirring things up, I would have shipped you two from the start." Time slipped by. A year later. It seemed like, with Mark and Monica, we were back to being school kids, laughing and goofing around all day long. There was no need to maintain or confirm your partner's love. Knowing you're loved so deeply really revitalizes you, makes you want to live life seriously. Mark and I had met each other's parents, and were ready to step into marriage again. My parents were a bit worried. I was too. But when Mark showed up with gifts and started wildly assuring them, they laughed. He's like a big golden retriever. Sure, he's noisy, but he seems genuine. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At that moment, Mark was all lovey-dovey in front of me. "I love you so much." I patted his head. "I love you too. Let's get married." When I told Monica about our wedding, she was more excited than me. She took me wedding dress shopping and snapped a dozen photos, posting a collage. "The woman I love is getting hitched." At the wedding venue, another collage. "Who's ready? They're really getting married here, and I'll have a front row seat." She spent a whole day on Twitter gushing about it, then looked at me with a grin. "I've never blocked Tom. Always thought I'd get a chance to get back at him someday." She patted my shoulder. "Let him regret it." I said, "Isn't Tom about to marry Jenny?" Monica laughed. "You blocked Tom, right? He called off the wedding. Almost married," he went on Twitter lamenting, saying he wasn't true to himself and didn't want to hold anyone back. Wedding cancelled. I was stunned. Monica patted my shoulder. "It wasn't that Tom didn't see you as a match, it's just that he's into calling off weddings." She was amused. "Doesn't Mark broadcast wedding updates on Twitter? Jenny can see it all. Imagine, newly dumped and then seeing Mark marry you. That's gotta sting." I chuckled and kept planning the wedding with Monica. Others breaking up have nothing on my wedding day. Thanks to Monica's Twitter, a bunch of old school friends found out about me and Mark getting married, and they all called to congratulate. I spent all day on the phone. Until late at night, a strange call came in. When I answered, it was silent. Just heavy breathing. I frowned. "Say something or I'm hanging up." A hoarse voice came through. "Sally, it's me." I froze. It had been so long since I heard Tom's voice. I was a bit disoriented. Was his voice always this raspy? But I kept it polite. "Hello, what's up? If I left anything at your place, just keep it." Tom's voice got rougher. "You're getting married?" to Mark? He seemed to struggle with it. Sally, I don't feel well. My chest has been hurting all day. I paused. Suddenly I remembered when Tom used to say he felt sick. I'd drop everything, take time off to take care of him. I'd drag him to the hospital, and if he refused, I'd cry with worry. I set alarms to remind him to take meds, made fresh orange juice, warm milk, steamed veggies, and porridge, trying to keep him healthy. But now, I cleared my throat. You should ask Jenny to help. I'm not a doctor. There was a pause on his end, and I heard Tom's heavy breathing. After a few seconds, he softly chuckled bitterly. It wasn't like this before. Before, I thought what you felt for me was love. I laughed. It's late. Anything else? Sally, don't hang up. Tom rasped, I have so much to tell you. It's too late. I was going to hang up. The watch. Tom blurted out, I can explain the watch. I was curious. I did want to hear the story behind that shiny watch. Might as well treat it as gossip. Tom cleared his throat. Before the wedding, Jenny came to me, crying hard. She said if she hadn't gone abroad, we'd be the ones getting married. I was flustered, thinking I had given you the ring, the marriage, but I wanted to say goodbye to Jenny, to my past. So I bought a pair of watches, Tom said with difficulty. At that moment, it felt like using a couple's watches to end the past perfectly, even if it was a facade. I didn't not want to marry you. I laughed through my anger, interrupting him. So, I get marriage, she gets love, completely equal and transparent? Tom paused. Spending a lot of time with Mark had made me sharp-tongued, something Tom hadn't seen before. His voice began to tremble. No, it's not like that, Sally. He said, after we broke up, I thought I'd be happy with Jenny. But I'm not. I keep thinking about you. I keep thinking about you and how you were there for me during my lowest points, how we got this far together. His voice quivered. I've never been happy since we split. It hit me that I made a huge mistake. I assumed I only liked you, not loved you. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Sally, my real love is you, but I realized it too late. I looked down at my fresh manicure. Silver nails with sparkling rhinestones and pearls. They looked so much like the cold light of those watches. Tom's painful sighs reached my ears, but all I could remember was how those cold lights had hurt my eyes. For months, I couldn't even look at shiny things. Seeing them gave me nightmares. Then Mark healed that for me. I finally stopped being scared of the sparkle. I took a deep breath. Tom, Mark and I are getting married soon. You're welcome to join us. If there's nothing else, I really need to sleep. If you really want to confess, talk to Jenny. I'm not the right person for that. With that, I hung up the phone decisively, leaving behind the silence. Before I knew it, it was only 2 or 3 days until Mark and my wedding. Monica caught a case of pre-wedding jitters, sending me 72 messages a day about what to watch out for on the big day. She also kept forwarding me marriage advice guides. The day before the wedding, she was tearing up, saying, I can't believe you're getting married, time flies. I chuckled, you're talking like you raised me or something. To stop her emotional roller coaster, I diverted her attention. Jenny called a couple days ago. Sure enough, Monica perked right up, wiping away her tears. What did she say? She was drunk, asking if she was a barrier between Mark and I. Actually, Jenny asked if Mark set me up as an exchange student to go abroad with him because he knew you liked Tom. She was laughing so much it was almost crying. He watched me make a move on him for years, never even held my hand. I thought he had different preferences, maybe was using me as a cover, but turned out it was just to make it easy for you to chase after Tom. Jenny cried and asked me, what's so special about you? Why did Mark play me for you? Now Tom also broke off our engagement. He once said he loved me. Jenny was so drunk and loud, it annoyed me. Especially when she claimed Mark schemed against her. I asked her back, wasn't it you who made sure everyone knew you liked Mark? Wasn't it you who agreed to go abroad? And weren't you the one who kept holding on, hoping for a chance? Even after thinking you'd just be a cover, you didn't give up, but when you saw your efforts didn't pay off, you turned your sights on Tom instead, right? Jenny, own up to your bets, have some grace. While she was stunned, I hung up the phone. I had to go to sleep early for the wedding. On the big day, Monica was my maid of honor for the second time. Mark was grinning big, see that? That's my wife. Isn't she beautiful? Smart too, if it weren't for her in high school, I'd be running the streets. Yeah, I liked her since high school, couldn't stop loving her. I'm staying put, not going abroad again. Started my own racing team here. Gotta stick close to my wife, I worry someone else might see how great she is. I couldn't help but laugh, my face turned red. In between the wedding, I hadn't eaten much that morning, felt tired and low on sugar. Mark hurried me to get some food, have a little break. After a few bites of snacks, I thought about all the MO family guests and decided to get some air at the entrance. I didn't expect to see a familiar figure there. Tall and thin, he stood alone, looking worn out. I almost didn't recognize it was Tom. Seeing me walk out, he froze, eyes fixed on me. After a long look, his eyes reddened. You look beautiful today, he said hoarsely, better than last time with me. I glanced at my dress, custom made by a designer friend Mark found. Makeup and hair, done by professionals he hired. Unlike the first time, when I did everything myself, this time was easier. Mark said all I need to do is look pretty and greet people. I smiled and nodded, thanks, I think so too. I gestured inside, want to come in? Tom shook his head, no, I'm just here to see you today. He hesitated, and maybe ask you something. I sensed nothing good from it, just nodded, suit yourself then, I'm heading back in. With that, I turned to leave. But Tom called after me, Sally. His voice trembled, filled with desperation, can I still turn back? This time, I've realized it. I know I love you. I'll never look at another woman. Forget about those days. He carefully asked me, I just want to love you earnestly. Like before, go to work in the morning, come back to you at night. Quiet and peaceful till old, is that still possible? I sighed, turned around. Tom's hands shook, his eyes still red, don't wear the wedding dress for someone else, please. He raised the back of his hand, covering his eyes, it hurts my eyes. Seeing him like that, I suddenly remembered the days I feared small diamonds. It wasn't without heartache. I slowly shook my head. Tom, stop dreaming. You can't undo what's done. No woman waits around for you to sort out if you like or love her. If you can't figure it out, then I'll go to the person who can, like Mark. I showed him my ring, I'm already Mark's legal wife, Tom. Our chances and ties were all used up by you. With that, I turned back to the banquet hall. Didn't glance back in his direction. Even though he choked while calling my name, my steps didn't falter once. Returning, I saw Mark leaning against the wall, grinning. I was surprised, weren't you mad? Mark jerked his chin toward the door, why would I be mad at a wandering dog? Following his gaze outside, Tom stood with red eyes, face turned down, hopeless look. As if he lost something precious. Like a well-dressed beggar, begging for something no longer his. I turned away, pulled Mark to continue the toast, still got 10 tables to go, let's hurry up, don't want it dragging too late. Mark's smile almost split his face, eager for the wedding night, huh? Get out. I blushed brightly. From afar, my parents watched us with satisfaction. Monica wore a I ship it look on her face. Nearby, Mark pulled me into his arms, whispered in my ear, I really love you so much. I sighed contentedly. Having people like you guys, it's really great. Even took the long way around, but didn't lose you guys, that's really lucky. But about Monica crashing at our place tonight, I politely refused. Tonight belonged to just Mark and me.